Super inspirational story here. We've got a guy who's 36 years old and he has traveled to 85 countries. He has a 6 property portfolio and he is pretty much retired. He's done it. He's packed his bags and he's now traveling off the income that he has from his property portfolio. And this is some of the inspirational stuff that I love to hear because everyone's got a different goal. For this guy, it's to travel every single country in the world and meet incredible people and have amazing stories to tell. Being 36 and being able to build a property portfolio to sustain him to be able to do this is absolutely incredible. And he's Kiwi born and well, doesn't live in Australia anymore. He's traveling the world. Did live in Australia. He's purchased properties in Australia, purchased properties in New Zealand. And this is an investor story. He's got nothing to sell. He's just sat in Bali right now, living his best life. And he's like, guys, mate, I've done some pretty cool stuff. I'm actually living here. Yeah, you want to chat? And we were like, yes, absolutely. I reckon you got some pretty interesting stuff to share. But just his attitude and approach, also the way he was a little bit more strategic, the questions he asked himself to be able to build the property portfolios where I saw a whole heap of value. Hey everyone, my name's Joe Tucker and together with Jeff Miles, we created Oz Property Investors, Australia's largest property investment community. We have over 81,000 property investors and each week we interview top property experts from all walks of property life and Sam O'Connor is no different. We also have the Level Up Property course which teaches the people that step-by-step process so they can go out there and achieve financial freedom exactly like this dude has done. He's 36 years old, has 6 properties and he's fully retired. This is ridiculous. I love stories like this. If you are an investor and you've got a cool story like this, guys, reach out to us. We want to hear from you. But let's jump in. Let's rock and roll.
And we are live on Oz Property Investors. We bring the big names and we have the big fun. Sorry, guys. This is going to be a huge session. This is a person who's traveling 25 to 30 countries based off his property portfolio. So we were having a little chat, a little chin wag about that before the show. So it's all fun. So if you want to learn about off 6 properties, I think you've sold 1 or 2. So I've kind of given a little bit away there early days, but there is more to be revealed. So Sam's going to talk about how he got started and how he's traveling to those 25 to 30 countries per year. So how you going anyway, Sam? What's happening, mate?
Yeah, very good. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Yeah, been a long time viewer, so it's good to actually be a guest rather than a viewer.
Long time viewer, first time caller, eh? That's what we all like to say.
That's right.
Thanks for it's an interesting way. And if anybody really thinks that they want to have a chat with us, Sam was very persistent, and I was sorry there was a little bit of back and forth on that. We got there in the end, but no, thanks. Sam reached out to me, and there was heaps of value in your story. So, Joe, what's cracking with you, man? You find rental yields left, right, and center that are stacking up in Queensland.
Mate, it's exciting times. No, I'm pumped for this session. I think it's going to be really good. It's funny, like the whole premise of this session is this guy has 6 properties and is retired and is just traveling the world, living his best life. And it's kind of funny because that's how I got into property. When I was 18, I did a whole heap of travel. I lived in New Zealand. I lived in a van. I went traveling Southeast Asia. I lived in Europe. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want to just do this forever. And how do you do that? Because what I would do is I would work in New Zealand or work wherever, and then I would go travel, and then I would be broke, and then I'd have to go back home and then work and then go travel and then be broke. And I'm like, how do people do this? How does it actually happen? So yeah, things have not actually gone down that path of doing the retirement traveling thing, but it was definitely what spurred it on. It spurred the education of finance and property and like, cool, this is what I want. Mate, This is exciting. So where are you right now? That's the question I want to know, Sam. Where are you right now?
Look, I'm over in Bali. I do spend a couple of months here in Bali, and then predominantly the rest of the time, I'm really doing about a country every 10 days. So it's pretty hectic. I mean, my goal is to travel to every country in the world. But back to what you're just saying, it's really interesting. I'm meeting more and more people now that are not wanting to do the whole 9 to 5, sit in front of the computer till they're 65 and retire. I think more and more people are clicking on that. Maybe there's more to life than, just working for someone. I think it's slightly different when you're working for yourself, but I think through real estate and it's becoming a lot more common now. When I first started learning about property, sort of almost 20 years ago, I think it was like one property magazine, and that was about it. I think now, because there's so much more information and so many success stories of people that are retiring younger, it's a lot easier.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I guess, like you don't need to have an like incredible net passive income to be able to just travel the world. Like as you were saying, you're like, it's actually cheaper to live in Bali than it is to live in Sydney.
Melbourne or Sydney,
So
yeah, with the rent and all
Melbourne or
that
Sydney
jazz.
or
Just the
wherever.
cost of living. It's crazy, isn't it,
Yeah,
guys?
and
Compared
I
to
think now also, I think traveling is a lot easier than it used to be. Just because of the internet, you can book accommodation in advance. You can use Skyscanner, for example. I probably won't name companies, but you can use booking search platforms to book flights well in advance, so you get good deals. But the cost of living in Australia is really expensive. I still think Australia is the best country in the world to live, by the way.
oh, better
But
than New Zealand, is it, man? That's a
well,
big call. I
yeah, look, New Zealand's a great country to visit, I believe, much
yeah.
like Bali, but to live long term, a lot of the statistics aren't the best. But the
Okay.
property markets are similar in some ways, but also different in a lot of others, which I'm happy to explain a little bit later on.
It's interesting just before we get into it because I reckon New Zealand's actually better than Australia. Just quietly, I've spent a little bit of time in New Zealand, but maybe I just need to spend a little bit more. But you are, for those of you who don't know Sam, and you
Oh,
may
yeah.
not, you may have seen him at a pub or a club in Bali, sort of checking out the sights and scenes. But you are a 36-year-old property investor, created enough passive income from 6 high yielding properties to retire, and now you're traveling 20 to 30 countries. So somebody did already ask that question. They said, is he really retired or living off his business income? So you don't necessarily, you might do the odd freelancing here or there, but do you do any freelancing or just if you need
No,
to?
look, yeah, look, I mean, obviously the quantity of properties isn't the most important. I've got a friend that owns 4 properties. He
Yeah.
Airbnbs them. Weirdly, one of them is in Queenstown in New Zealand, and he's got two in Sydney and one in London, and he makes
Yep.
probably 10 times me. So, um, yeah, the quantity of properties, like anyone knows, is not the most important thing. It's the actual cash flow that they bring in.
Yeah, it's
But
crazy
yeah,
you
look,
mentioned. Sorry, it's crazy you mentioned that. Like Steve Ignite, who's a big mentor of Joe's mind, he has now 3 or 4 commercial properties and he talks about this publicly. So we're not talking out of school. He's over $500,000 in passive income through those 3 or 4. So and there's people that have 50 or 100 properties and they probably don't have anywhere near as much income coming in. But back to so you sort of say your mate makes 10 times you because the Airbnbs around the place, but you kind of go pretty well too, from the sounds of it.
yeah, well, obviously the Airbnb is a lot more work. There is property managers, but there's negatives and pros. The banks are a little bit more skeptical of it because it's not such a regular, weekly income. It does vary a lot.
Mm.
But yeah, so back to your point, yeah, I've managed to, not have to work off the 6 properties, predominantly because I've bought such high yielding properties. Like the last purchase I done was a block of 4 units, and that's at a 14% gross yield, about a 10% yield.
Gee.
And that was just purely because the size of the units were under 50 square meters. So a lot of the mainstream banks
Ah.
weren't keen on lending it. And one of the things I sort of wish I'd done a little bit earlier when I started investing was not writing off these second tier lenders. I was always very skeptical of them. And I only wanted to use the big 4 banks or the big 5 banks. And I've had a
Yep.
lot of friends that actually earlier in their career they've used these non-mainstream banks or second tier lenders, or what do you want to call them. And yeah, they
Mm.
might charge 1 or 2% more in interest, but if it means you get the deal and it's a 14% yield, does it really matter?
Yeah, that's such a great point. That's very much overlooked. I was having this conversation. I have this conversation all the time, and it's like, no, it has to be with CBA, ANZ, one of the big 4s. Okay, great. Well, why? And also, is it going to be
Yeah.
forever? Like, we've got property in the Oz property portfolio. So we're building a passive income to $150,000 in public. And one of the points was we did exactly that. We couldn't get CBA to lend us the money. So we got a high loan. I can't remember off the top of my head what it was, at 7 point some.
7.29. Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it 7 point? Yeah, that's right, 7.29, and
Got a
then
discount.
it grew in value, which then increased the LVR, which then meant that we can then approach these new lenders of the higher, like the better rated lenders. So just because you're going with the second, third, fourth tier lender, or loan shark down the street, doesn't mean you need to. No, not the loan shark down the street, but the third tier lenders doesn't mean you're going to be there forever. So sit with them for a year, sit with them for 2 years, deal with that extra 1%. And then when the property has increased because you've done renovations, because you bought well, then that's when you can kind of start making a shift into these better banks and get the better interest rates. But 1% on $1 million is $10,000 a year.
Yep.
So that's what we saved by doing that. But we were strategic in paying the $10,000 for the first 12 months. It was actually 8 months ago that we bought it, but whatever, you get the point. Sorry, I've kind of derailed.
I want to know though. I want to, because you just said something very nonchalantly. You said 16% or 14% gross yield roughly, and that's sort of a net of roughly 10%. So that was just, you said that you roll it off like it was like everybody's just picking these up left, right, and center. And I want to sort of like, obviously that's probably not your first property purchase. So how did that sort of all start? Like, what did the first property, or before you even bought the first property, what was the lead up to that? How did you sort of get passionate about property and go from there?
Yeah, look, I mean, I started pretty young in terms of information. I think I was like at the library. I think I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad when I was like 10 years old, for example. And then I was reading property magazines by about 12. I was pretty lucky when I turned about 14 or 15. My parents got quite involved in property investment. My mum was a teacher and my dad was a builder, but they built quite a sizable portfolio and continue to do so. And then what I did is I did a bachelor of property degree, which obviously encompasses all the parts of property finance, valuation, development, accounting, all the different aspects. So that helped a lot. And just a side point to that is a lot of people say, "Oh, I needed a property degree to learn property," but realistically, if I probably went to Amazon or whatever the library and read the top 10 books on property investment and watch podcasts like yourself, you'll probably do a 4-year degree in about 6 weeks. So I tell everyone that. No, I don't regret it, but it's just there's quicker ways than going to uni for 4 years. And then I worked in property management. Mainly because that's the only job I could get at the time. It was about 2008 when it was like the GFC, so it's like there was no really jobs in real estate. Like development firms weren't doing anything. Investment was really quiet. And then I first purchased. I'm a New Zealand citizen, so I was brought up in New Zealand. So I purchased my first one in New Zealand. It was a bit time later, once I graduated uni, about 2012, I think, from memory. And back then it was a different landscape. You could buy with low deposits. There wasn't so much scrutiny on income and things like that. So I bought in a regional town in New Zealand called Whangarei, and that was my first one. And that was pretty much cash flow positive from day one. All the properties that I've purchased, I've always added value and created equity, and pretty much all of them, the most common way I've done that is by looking at the floor plan. And you don't need to be an architect to look at a basic floor plan. You can pick it up pretty quickly, and looking at where I can add value by the creation of bedrooms. In my opinion, the adding of bedrooms is probably the easiest way and the cheapest way to create equity. Obviously, you got paint and carpet. That's obviously a no-brainer. But in terms of adding maybe 50,000 or 200,000, I've found that the easiest way, and then just recycling that equity as quickly as possible. And then I moved to Sydney.
Super interesting. Super interesting way to do it. That's exactly. So we've bought 4 properties for the Oz property portfolio. One is a development site. One's a block of units that we can strata title, split into 4. The other one is a 3 into 4 renovation. And then the third one is a full scale renovation, which we've just built a wall to put up the 4th to create that instant equity. And you don't even need a builder. We have a handyman putting up the wall and a guy that can put up a bit of plasterboard. Like it costs $3,000 to $5,000 to do it. And if you do it in the right spot, exactly like what you're talking about, Sam, 50,000, great. 80,000, 100,000. Like it's just that disparity between And also, actually, I was chatting with an investor today who bought a property about 2 years ago, and I was like, "Great, your property's got, it was bought for 570, and it's now worth 690." And he's like, "No, it's worth 720." I'm like, "Oh, great, you got the bank." He's like, "Oh no, mate, we had to chat to like 5 or 6 banks to get that equity to make to get the valuation to stack up at the 720." But there's so many little tips that chat to multiple brokers, not multiple brokers, sorry, chat to multiple banks to get the different valuations, and then go with the one that gives you the equity that you need. So that was working early on.
Sorry.
So the strategy is still working today. Like we're doing it today, and you're saying how long ago was this when you would
purchase it?
Yeah, I first purchased personally in my own name in 2016, but with the family trust, probably 20 years ago, because I was quite good at sourcing the deals and looking at yields and things like that, just because of my property background. But yeah, the other thing is you mentioning also there about the different valuations. When I purchased I purchased property in January this year, and I wanted to get some, the lender was wanting some rental appraisals, and I went to one. I thought, oh, that's a bit low. I ended up going to 5 different ones and used the higher of them. I mean, it's technically called shopping around. It's legal, but there's no harm in using 2 different valuers or getting a few different market appraisals, because valuers and property managers and even sale agents, they all have their own opinion of what the value may be, and it's not. If you've ever studied valuation, and I did study valuation. I'm not a registered valuer, but I studied valuation. There is a bit of a grey area. It might be 5 or 10% where it's just a difference of opinion of what the exact value might be.
And you listen to Belinda Batsolis. She's Belinda the Valuer, who I'm seeing her in more and more content. And she kind of says, look, it'll come down to, it does actually come down to how well the property can be presented. And it's even more than that. It's about, how sort of do you make it nice and easy for that value? Do you come with comparables and say, I saw this property, and not saying that that's what it has to be valued at, but and even some of the value LVR, not that the valuer typically knows that, but that she kind of wishes that the values would know that. But it's just interesting to hear. Yeah, there's definitely it'll come in investor heavy markets. They can tend to be a little bit cautious. So that's just something to be mindful of where you're buying, where there's heavily investor influenced markets. So just be a little bit careful of that. Your valuation, and that's why sometimes they don't stack. I wanted to ask this one. This is from Tim, and Tim watches most weeks. He's a heavy property investor as well, big property investor. He said, how do you get in a position to buy in New Zealand while still at university? How did that you must have been earning some good coin, good side hustling, or how did that go?
Yeah, I think I mentioned on it earlier. I mean, back in the day, you only needed a 10% deposit, so it was reasonably easy. I was just sort of at the stage I was importing products off AliExpress and selling them on the equivalent of eBay. It's called Trade Me New Zealand. So I managed to sort of scrape enough there. But the good thing about New Zealand is over Australia, and I'm still a big fan of investing in Australia, by the way. I still think it's probably got better long-term growth. But as New Zealand's slightly different, where they don't charge a stamp duty. So there's no LMI as well, which is obviously can save quite a bit on a purchase. There's no capital gains tax.
Yep.
This is a flipper's paradise. Like, not that much money in, no capital gains on the way out. Like, that's what eats into all of your renovation and flipping budget.
The New Zealand market, though, in the last kind of 12 to 18 months, I think has gone a little bit sideways. I think or even down. I think it's sort of saying it's in free fall. I'm like, well, I don't know. Like it did sort of kind of got pretty heated over there. So it kind of made sense that it did have to sort of have a bit of correction. But is that mostly your sort of Auckland, not Christchurch, but Auckland, Wellington? Are they the major sort of markets that are seeing a bit of a
Yeah, well, it's a bit like Australia. You've got different markets, right? Like you've got Perth in the last year that's just gone nuts, and then you've got maybe Melbourne apartments that have had no growth in 10 years. So it really varies on the area, and then also the type of property. Like apartments typically haven't had the best of growth, but houses in say Queenstown, which is probably well known to a lot of Australians because of the ski destination, that's probably up 30% for the year. So it really varies on multiple factors. But yeah, certainly it's been quieter than it has been, the last previous 5 years. And that's mainly, political issues, but also, obviously just interest rates being high. and some the government really been a bit more tougher on landlords in terms of like standards of living. They have sort of have requirements where there needs to be heaters and heat pumps and more costs involved. And also
And they
New
got
Zealand,
rid of negative. They got rid of negative gearing or something, didn't they, as well? Or there was some sort of change around that, and then they brought it back in.
yeah, there's no negative gearing. So and then also it's only just come back into force now, but you couldn't write off interest as an expense. I mean, I think it's like one of the only countries in the world. So you'd say you're getting $1,000 a week in rental income, and you had $1,000 mortgage in an interest, say interest only, you couldn't write off. You're paying tax on $1,000.
Yeah,
right.
it got pretty. Yeah, it's interesting. So getting back to how do you sort of apart from the reading the books and the family, how did you then sort of get confident and comfortable about pulling the trigger on that first kind of unit or property? Like, how did that all go? Like, do you just say, "Hey, look, I'm going to make this happen," and just do it? Like you took action.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's probably like how you advise people. It's obviously looking at a lot of the different metrics. I go quite into detail where I look at, I go look at who's the neighbours. Is any social housing there? I look at zoning. A lot of people say to me, "Oh, I want to buy an area that's like a building boom." I'm like, "Why do you want? You don't want oversupply, right? You want to buy in areas. I recommend to people buy in areas where there's like development restrictions, like Bondi Beach, Sydney, for example. If you look at a photo from 50 years ago, looks pretty much the same. There's no massive skyscrapers like Surfers Paradise. So I like zoning where it's hard to build. It's hard to build multi-unit, especially apartments, because they flood the market. And then, obviously just looking at the yield, and then your typical sort of building and pest inspection reports, make sure the building's all solid. But just remaining unemotional, like especially when I was working with, the family trust a bit more on viewing properties. If we turned up and saw some shitty nappies scattered around and some dude screaming from the window drunk, I was like, this is great. It's going to put off other buyers. So I was almost like, the rougher the property cosmetically, the better, because paint and carpet's cheap. You can go vacant possession if there's tenants that might not be the most desirable for the area. So it's a mixture of sort of just looking at the building, but also obviously a lot of the statistics and what's happening around the area.
Nice.
So,
and it sounds like you should write a book.
When you wrote a book?
No, I said it sounds like you should write a book about your journey.
Oh.
You'd have to, Go on, Joe. Where did you?
Yeah. So where did you start buying? So sorry, you bought in New Zealand first or Australia first?
Yeah, I bought in New Zealand, and then I moved to Australia in 2017, and I bought a few months after that.
Wow.
And originally what I did, and I think it's a common mistake people did, is I approached a bank directly, just thinking, oh, well, brokers,
They've
like
got
just do it
money.
myself. Yeah. And what happened then, it was CBA Bank, and they came back at, we can lend you 380,000. And then anyway, someone recommended I go to a broker, and obviously a broker doesn't cost as a purchaser. So I did it to them, and they sort of moved things around. They said, look, like you should be including, I had a couple of flatmates in, and they said, well, you should be including your flatmates as an income, even though you're not the owner, you're still receiving this income. So the broker, my serviceability went from 380 to maybe 600,000.
That's a very creative lending going on there, because you must have I don't know, maybe things have it's just interesting they allowed you to do that. I mean, that might have not necessarily been, well, I suppose it's more around, you could argue that you're not paying the full, maybe reduce your expenses, or did it increase your income?
And the broker had some good other points. There was things like, like I was doing sort of ATM cash withdrawals, and he just said, stop that. They don't know.
That's a huge red flag, because you kind of, it looks like you might be going down to the pokies and gambling away. If that was just kind of that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And at one stage, I said, look, if I moved into my friend's house and lived there rent free, what would that increase my serviceability? And it increased it like $60,000. And if people are willing to take the sacrifice, you can. It's probably easier to purchase than you think, but you do need to make some sacrifices, especially if it's your first purchase.
Yeah, it's I chatted to someone about that as well, of like how I'm sick of. I'm sorry to saying I've chatted to someone about that, but it's every time you say something, I'm like, oh yeah, that's exactly. But you don't realize how much you can sacrifice until you have a reason why to sacrifice it, right? Like one of I got a new job, a couple of years back, more than a couple of years back, and I was like, I need my salary to be high, and I don't want commissions, so that I can go ahead and buy property. Like everything was I was doing everything in my life to get property investing, to get it going. Like there's somebody at work right now. There's probably someone at work right now watching this, and they're working their ass off, and it's 8 p.m. at night. But they're like too scared to go to the boss. But you could go to the boss and ask for an extra $10,000, like, and say, Mr. Boss, you need it. Like, I'm working so hard right now. I'm doing this. This is why you need to pay me more. And if they say no, great, change job, move, get more money, get more income, which is then going to give you more serviceability, which is then going to allow you to lend more, which is then going to allow you to get more investment properties to then eventually be able to do something like what Sam's doing.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You've got income, and expenses. And incomes can be a little bit harder to increase. But I always sort of like brought things and sold things online and brought cars or whatever. If you're really wanting to hustle to save for a deposit, there is things you can do. I mean, you can always do a second job. I mean, I'm not saying work yourself to death, but if you're willing to work on a Sunday between say 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. to 10 p.m., you're probably going to be on, in most places in Australia, $30 to $40 an hour. Yeah. And then, I've always, when I'm starting out, I've always lived with flatmates to keep my rent down. And a lot of my friends, they're like, oh, I don't want to live with anyone else. Well, I'm like, okay, well, if you're in Sydney or Melbourne, you're probably paying $500 or $600 a week, So, I've typically cooked my own meals at home. I don't buy $8 coffees. I mean, I'm sounding like Tim Gurner now, but it's my point is there is some sacrifice starting off, and people come to me and say, oh, you're so lucky. But what they don't realize is there's many years where I was living pretty frugally, even now, I fly jets, I fly economy. I usually just fly whatever's cheapest, Jetstar, I don't give a crap, but other people are like, no, I only want to fly Qantas, or I don't like Jetstar. And I'm like, it's like value for money, and for me, it's I'm in a position now, I probably could fly, business class if I wanted to. I just don't see it as value for money. So I think if you have that mindset of not being wasteful, then your expenses will decrease, or two, your income will go up.
Yeah, I like that. It's kind of like pick your heart. Like, do you want the maybe it's not ideal to travel on economy with Jetstar, but if you want to get to the situation where you can go and travel to 20 to 30 countries a year, or you don't even have to do that. Insert your own kind of dream here. It can be literally saving the turtles, which Dave Gow he loves doing. He loves saving the turtles, and that's just what he loves doing. He's from Money. I don't remember the exact book, but it's Money, Strong Money. That's it, Strong Money Australia. But mate, where do I want to go? We did promise financial freedom or passive income. So how did you then sort of let's kind of fast forward to first property you purchased? How many years were you in accumulation phase? Sam, there you go. That's kind of what I was almost getting to. It's like I can read the audience's mind without looking at the comments. So you did that first time. What happened after that? How did it go? You went to Australia, I think, did you?
Yeah. Well, look, I was always of the frame of mind in my early 20s to not work super long hours for multiple years. So I've always sort of I've worked a few months and then gone traveling overseas and stuff. And so, if I'd really gone hard from the start, I probably could have done it in 3 years where I had enough income to not have to work. But so it took me probably from about 2016 to 2022 when I went pretty hard. And then from basically 22, that's when I sort of wound down and started traveling. I like I mentioned, I sort of in that 25, 35 countries a year. I'm open to the idea. Like my service
traveling go with COVID. How was traveling with COVID? I know it's not really property related, but man, it was a nightmare over here in Australia, like during COVID.
Well, I sort of kicked it off my sort of full-time travel in 2022, and by then majority of the world was open up. I mean, some countries like Mexico and Sweden had no restrictions, and and Indonesia was, they legally had restrictions, but it wasn't enforced. But I stayed in Australia at that time, and I actually purchased a property because I was working a job. The banks were happy to lend again, so I purchased another property in Sydney, a property in it's an area called Guildford, which
Guildford. Hey, good old
Yeah.
Guildford Leagues, man. This is not battleground territory, but yeah, like you're talking like quite working class Guildford. There you go.
Yeah, well, Guildford, and there's another one, Harris Park, I believe. It's sort of right next to Parramatta, which Parramatta's like they're almost calling it like a second city of Sydney, right, or its own city.
They
Mm.
built about
It's
4,000
interesting.
apartments there in the last 10 minutes, I heard, in Parramatta. They built
Yeah,
a lot of apartments
um,
there.
a lot of apartments, and that's sort of the problem with a lot of its apartments is that it has had the highest capital growth, but now it's become one of the cheapest suburbs in Sydney, and I just don't believe you can even build an apartment the cost price for as cheap as the selling. So in my view, it's probably got some pretty good growth in the medium to long term future. And in the past, I used to be really skeptical of properties that had no growth. But if you look at the last couple of years where there's been a lot of growth, like the Gold Coast and regional outskirts of Perth, Rockingham, for example, where a lot of buyer agents have been absolutely pouring into. Rockingham had no growth for about 10 years. Surfers Paradise and Gold
Yeah.
Coast apartment market, I think it had 12 years of almost no growth. And then all of a sudden it's playing catch up where it jumps, 50% in the last few years. So yeah, that's why I purchased in that area of Sydney. I mean, your stock standard, if you just in eastern suburbs, Sydney, you know, it's the yield's so low, 2%. So, just massively cash flow positive,
Yeah.
cash flow negative, I should say.
Yeah. So what did you end up buying? So you bought a unit in the Guildford market. What was the kind of yield on that? And how
Yeah,
did it
look,
feel going from New Zealand yields of 10 to 15% to then go into like a 4 or 5, or what was it?
yeah. Well, what happened is New Zealand, the government brought in legislation where you now need a 40% deposit. So that's
Yeah.
why I was more keen to get back
Mm,
into Australia again because, I think I got that one on a 10.1. And I asked the broker, I'm saying, why do you make it 10.1, not 9.8 or 10? And he said, well, the LMI. So didn't have to pay the LMI. So I think that's correct. Yeah, 10.1. And yeah, the purchase price on that was 442,000, and it rents
oh wow.
for 495 a week. So
Wow.
at the time, it was actually massively cash flow positive because the interest rates, I think I fixed it like 2.6.
Zero,
Now,
pretty much.
now it's about break even, give or take. Yeah, so yeah, that's the reason I got involved there, and yeah, purely just like that's what the banks are willing to lend on for that amount, and yeah, I was just like, something's better than nothing. Those record low interest rates. I thought, look, this is maybe a once in a lifetime opportunity, which obviously a lot of people, realized because there was a property boom. And
You
I
could
just
have
sort of thought,
you
"Mm,
could have looked a couple of suburbs over, and I'm not saying to buy here now, and you need to pick the pockets, but Lakemba market for units, you're able to pick up something high to mid freeze a couple of years ago. They're now sort of mid fours. And the yields sort of come back, and the data on that looks fantastic. But at the same time, you just have to be very careful as to what you buy, and also the pockets of Lakemba. I'm not saying go out and buy it tomorrow, but yeah, that's there's been a lot of demand, and it's maybe this disparity between units and house prices, and you saw that across Brisbane as well. Like you saw north side of Brisbane, like townhouse, and you sort of saw townhouses selling for 300 to 350 that are now selling for 600 to 650 because there was that big a gap between them, and the yields were pretty damn good because rents had increased. So I
yeah,
don't necessarily know if Guildford or Harris Park are going to see that, but yeah, could do so, mate. So you sort of
yeah,
went that. Sorry, go, man.
yeah." No, just following on from what you're saying with the different areas. When I was first starting, I was pretty particular on the areas that I knew myself.
Yeah,
And now when I'm looking at property, and I look through about 100 a week, and out of 100 there might be one that's sort of interest where the numbers might work. So this year I'm going pretty hard. I just revalued a property that I purchased for 578. It's now worth 980,000. That's a CBR evaluation. So this
Fantastic.
year I'm going pretty hard. But what I'm doing now is and yourself and your viewers probably do this is maybe not just be set on where you live or the suburb, but actually just look right across Australia or right across New Zealand. Really do your research, right? You got to talk to valuers and agents, and I'm not the biggest fan of buyer agents, but I think there is some value in them, especially if you've got very little knowledge or much skill in doing research.
yeah,
Well, I
But
mean, like
yeah,
The question that I actually have is New Zealand. You're Kiwi, so you can go ahead and buy there. Like, can I, Australian born, can I just go over there and buy investment properties? Like, what? Let's say I'm Australian. How do I go ahead and get these Kiwi properties?
Yeah, 100%. Look, I'm not. Yeah, obviously, I'm not a lawyer, so I think anyone that's going to buy a property,
Put
if
a
it's New
disclaimer
Zealand,
up.
one Australia. There you go.
General information.
There you
Yeah,
go.
Yeah.
at the current time, and it has been for a number of years, is that New Zealanders and Australians, and I believe actually Singapore, weirdly enough, I don't know why, but they are all treated as
Hmm.
citizens when it comes to buying property. So there's no restrictions. You don't need any government approvals or absolutely anything. You can just go and go to an auction or submit an offer on a property and buy it. You do. I think you might need to set up maybe like a tax file number or something like that, which is reasonably easily to do. But in New Zealand, Australia, very very lucky because that free trade agreement that's been in place a number of years.
The thing that scared me about Singapore,
So
like you're buying an apartment for anyway. Yeah, we'll talk about that another time.
Singapore investment now. But so actually, we can just go ahead. So I've got an income in Australia. I can just go ahead and buy New Zealand property as if it's like as if it's like going to, it was actually closer than WA. But that's how it works. I can just borrow the banks. They'll look at my income here and say, yeah, that's fine. Don't
Yeah, they seem
need
to look at both
Kiwi.
incomes. My
Yeah.
my understanding is that the banks do scale it. They might say, okay, we're going to factor in 70%, and I think that's due to maybe currency fluctuations. But there's a lot
Yeah.
of New Zealanders living in Australia, and there's not as many, but there's a few Australians living in New Zealand. But even if you're not living in the country, you can still borrow based on your incomes of either country.
That's definitely right. And of course, it's going to be different from banks because I was when I was broking back in the day, we'd have actually we'd have a lot of New Zealanders coming over to Australia, but they'd be like, "I want to buy a place to live. Can you pick me up a mortgage now?" And the conversation was, it's much easier if you're earning in the currency. If you're, let's just say, if they're in New Zealand, they're earning Aussie dollars, wanting to buy in Australia, it's much easier because otherwise, and vice versa. Like if you're a Kiwi wanting to buy in New Zealand but earning Aussie dollars, yeah, they do sort of shade it by typically sort of 10 to 20%, sometimes up to 30, but yeah, 10 to 20. So
Yeah.
it can be
Right.
challenging, but yeah.
And I think also my understanding is like CBA Bank owns a bank in New Zealand called
ASB,
ASB. So I
Auckland
think
Savings Bank.
if you are planning to buy in New Zealand, maybe talk to New Zealand mortgage broker or professionals, other professionals, and find out what is the best way to build your credit up. Because you might purposely want to actually open a mobile phone account to build a credit score. Just to show that you don't default on things and open bank accounts, maybe a year or 2 years in advance, and get a card and use it just so that bank knows, some sort of history that you've been with them.
How does it go with like disclosure of different assets and things in Australia? So I'm thinking, put the disclaimer up of, but no, I'm thinking like you've got a property, you're fully tapped out in Australia from a lending perspective because Australia won't lend you anything anymore. Like, is there a way to have a chat with someone in New Zealand and you might not have to mention your trusts or your other properties or your other things? Like, have you heard
Yeah,
of that
yeah.
happening
Look,
before?
what is interesting is the banks on either side don't actually verify the assets that you own in the other country. They don't actually look up, the
Yeah,
government
that's what I was
database.
thinking.
I've always been really transparent, just because I've never wanted to ruin
Yeah.
a relationship with a bank. I
Yeah.
probably
Mhm.
could not disclose a certain expense or a mortgage or whatever, but I've always just been like, if you burn a lender, then you're probably going to be blacklisted for life, if that's such a thing. So I've always just wanted to be honest from that perspective. There is some grey areas. I've had friends sort of maybe not disclose something. And it's not because they didn't want to disclose, it's just they weren't asked to disclose it, right? So I think the other
Yeah.
thing is, like, if a lender is asking for information, I only give them what they ask. I don't volunteer more information. I'm not going to tell them that I'm hungover right now because I partied last night in Bali, right? Because why would you volunteer that? It's not a good look. You know, that's why I'm sweating, by the way, because it's hot
No,
and I'm
but
hungover.
that's interesting you say that because yeah, you are like the moment there is any sniff that there might be something there where there's smoke, there's fire. So
Yeah,
if you aren't going to do that, if there's any sort of trail or any sort of payment in on the bank statement that a lender sees, they'll sort of accredit as soon as they ask the question. If you can't come up with a good answer for it, then it can be an automatic decline. So you just have to be very careful on your paperwork and dotting your I's, crossing your T's.
And also just how you structure it. Say you're wanting some help from your parents. Say your parents will give you 50,000 towards a deposit on your first property or multiple properties, whatever it may be. Rather than get that 50,000 as, say, a loan, which is the liability which you have to disclose. If you get your parents to technically say it's a gift, and then you verbally say, look, I'll pay you back at some point in the future. Yeah, they go, yeah, it's fine, whatever. It's not a legal contract or anything. So, if it's a gift, the banks are going to not see that as a debt, and that's going to make your, purchasing power better. So, I think it's good to always do things legally, but you can be a little bit crafty to structure in the best way that's going to get you the most finance.
There you go.
Yeah.
See?
The way I think about it is like there's rules that they have. Like the bank wants to lend you money. The bank is here saying, I want to give you as much money as I physically can, but we just have some rules that we have to follow. And if you just follow the rules, then you're going to be okay. But there are rules that you can, like, that's it. That those rules are hard and fast, but there's so many things there's so many gray areas within that you can,
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
little
this
things,
block,
nothing illegal, obviously. But
nothing legal. Yeah, like this block of units I brought, I used a company called Base Corp, which is second tier, and people are skeptical, but they're just like a normal bank. They're still regulated, so I didn't see a problem. And they said, like, well, what's the rents on the property? And the rents were really low. They're like $250 a unit, and the actual market rent was about 400, and they rented out for 400 now. So in that case, I did volunteer more information. I said, look, the rents are 250, but the actual market rents are 395. If you want, I can get the agent to give a market appraisal to show as evidence. So I think disclosing information to banks, there's no harm in disclosing information that's going to help you. It's just you don't want to disclose information where they haven't asked for it. That's not going to help you.
Yeah, typically in that situation, I'll probably just take it as it's rented. But yeah, it might help if it's tight. They'll be like, oh, there's a little bit of fat there. You can definitely, ideally you want to get it increased if you can. But yeah, somebody sort of, and this will talk to some of the lessons. Somebody said, can you walk? I know you said some of the research you do was you go and you actually kind of understand what's going on in the area from a development and how much is being developed. What are the sort of, do you follow much of the data? Like what is that? So you look at days on market, do you look at vacancy rates, all that sort of jazz? Or what are the key takeaways that you look for?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I do is the family trust, there's probably been like 56 purchases that I've done with them, and then myself have done 6. So I've done, a lot of due diligence on different properties. And I think the first thing is to spend as little as possible to start with. Like if you're gonna submit an offer on a property, don't go spend $10,000 on builders reports and everything else. Like get your finance first, right? So when I'm looking at a property, typically it's like obviously what you mentioned, the occupancy or the vacancy rates, rents in the area, is market rent. What would market rent be if it was vacant tomorrow? Looking at infrastructure projects in the region, different subsidies as well, different areas like New Zealand at the moment, they'll give you a subsidy if you take in social housing clients. They'll pay maybe double as much than market rent if you're willing to take on these tenants. So looking at where value can be added. I know Australia it's big, like the whole granny flat situation. I'm a big fan of that. I reckon there's just so many success stories of people buying and putting a granny flat on, and all of a sudden it's like a 20% yield or 15% yield. What I mentioned earlier, like changing the floor plans where I can add value through renovation. What else? I mean, obviously every region's different, and like this year I'm looking at all regions, and sometimes it can be really hard to understand because you only got to have one street that's bad, and 3 streets over it's really good. And unless you know the area, it can be very tricky. And I think that's where, talking to agents and valuers and building a bit of a team around you, even accountants and lawyers, like I've never been scared to spend money on lawyers. I've always found them good value for money. People go, I hate paying $400 an hour. I'm like, they're great, right? They can look through the title. Is there any easements on it? Is there covenants of some type? Is there been building issues? A lot of properties now have got unconsented works, and you only need one complaint from a neighbor, then you've got to rip out that second kitchen, or you got to remove that granny flat or whatever it may be. So I've always been a fan of, once I've done my own personal due diligence, which is just your basic, growth and yield and quality of the property, then engage the lawyers, and they do that really fine print, and especially with strata, like I sold a property actually in September, settled in January this year in Sydney, and the buyers, I was shocked just how little due diligence they're wanting to do. Like some of them didn't, no building and pest restriction, no strata report, like they had
That's
no idea whether
crazy.
there was special levy coming up. And so I've always done that, where like especially for strata properties is getting a building and pest inspection support, a strata report, getting them to look through every single AGM meeting for the last 10 years. Is there any structural issues? Is there issues where, like I saw one the other day where it was used as an Airbnb. It was like a super high yield, and I was like, man, this is good. Looked at the strata
True.
minutes. They at the last AGM they had voted that the next following year Airbnb would not be allowed. So it sounds, initially you look at it, you're like, man, it's good yield. But if you hadn't read that strata AGM, your yield would be gone.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't
Yeah,
it?
well, it's a great point as well. Like when it comes to that fine print, anyone that's looking in Victoria at the moment, it's crazy. Like I'm looking at a contract that we're addressing, and we chatted to the conveyancer, the legal side of things, and it's literally just one word changes the fundamental development potential of this lot. It says hereby covenant has said the Western Builders blah blah blah. There is that no dwelling house shall be erected upon hereby transferred blah blah blah, and the fact that it said hereby a dwelling rather than one dwelling. So if it said one dwelling, you could only ever put one house on it. But as it said a dwelling, it allowed you to do multiple dwellings, and it's like, holy crap! If you didn't. You see people going for the development. If that said one, you would never pick that up as a normal everyday person, which is why you need to have a key
Experts.
conveyancer going through every single
Yeah, and I
contract.
think also,
But also,
I was just going to mention,
sorry, go
even
on.
with the lawyers, don't. I've always scrutinized the lawyers too. Like I'd actually look through it myself.
Yes.
Don't just rely 100% on the lawyers.
Yeah.
Point this out in the net and say, look, because they, there might be a stormwater pipe, and they might just say, oh, that's very normal. Well, another one is like when I brought in Sydney, my first purchase actually. I got the strata, not the building inspection report, and it said, oh, there's asbestos, and I freaked out. I thought, don't even touch it, asbestos. My lawyer said, look, about 40% of apartments in Sydney have asbestos. It's so common, it's not funny. It's only if you cut it open it becomes an issue. So, yeah, I think it's doing your own research, but also don't be scared of using professionals, valuers and particularly lawyers. Planners quite often, they'll give you free advice. They say, look, I want to change this to a 2-bedroom to a 4-bedroom. Here's a walkthrough video. Get the agent to take a video. Do you think it would be possible? And they go, yes or no. They go, structural beams, just don't even touch it. And they go, otherwise, yep, it's not a problem. So a lot of people are willing to help out. Some even at no cost, as long as you do eventually use their services at some point. But I think it's best to spend a bit of money, and that will either save you a lot or add a lot of value. And another one is structures. Like I originally started purchasing in my own name, and then I soon clicked on, because I didn't want to pay an accountant. I didn't want to pay an accountant to give me advice. I just thought I'd buy my own name, and now I sort of learned that some people, it may be better to buy in trusts. Each property in a trust for serviceability purposes. So I think the due diligence isn't only in the actual property, but it's also the structure and the finance and everything like that.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great point. But also check that, ask better questions, get better answers. And also people will, like your professionals will respect you more. Like my note to the conveyancer was, hey, Mr. Conveyancer, there's an easement and covenant on this property. I believe it to be this. What do you believe it to be? And they're like, oh, actually, no, this one says A. And I'm like, I don't think I can develop it. Do you think we can? Actually, yeah, you can, because blah, blah, blah. One of the things I wanted to go on from this is like, what's your strategy? Like from how do you think about strategy? Because I've heard New Zealand at 14%, then back to Australia at these 5.5% yields, now back to New Zealand. Like, how would you describe your strategy, or how do you explain the strategy piece?
Yeah, look, I think it just depends on the environment, the interest rates, and the government policies at the time. I know there's certain states in Australia, like I know New South Wales there for a point. There was no stamp duty. You paid it as a yearly rate, so that's going to make it easier to
Yeah,
purchase. I don't
they
know.
flicked it over, and then the new government came in and said, no, that's a nice try.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
said, no, you can't have that anymore.
yeah. So I look at that. So I'm back into. I just extracting equity from New Zealand property at the moment in cash, and now I'm going to fund that for deposits in Australia,
There you
and
go.
purely just purely for the reason that that I don't need a bigger deposit. I still looking in New Zealand because I'll still buy there if the yield's high enough, but it does tie up a lot of equity at
You got to
40% rather
chip
than
in
Australia,
40.
5 or 10.
Yeah, that was a question. So, what areas you may not have dove into this, but Kirsty or Christy asked, what areas in Australia have you invested in recently? I suppose a bit of Sydney, but what areas do you think will do well? So, have you got any? Not that people have to do their own research, but what are you where are you thinking you may be looking in Australia?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I'm no expert, and people, that you guys would know a lot more about all the different hotspots of Australia than me. I probably read about 5 hours a week of podcasts and different data and stuff,
Yeah,
and I wouldn't really be comfortable telling people publicly that they should definitely go to this area or definitely not. I mean,
that's right.
it seems to be a common thread. A lot of people are talking about Victoria, Melbourne. I think,
Government policy
I,
down there is still a bit ordinary, but and the minimum standard as well kind of scares me a touch. But I suppose if
yeah,
you can, as long as it's all about the due diligence, about that detail, if you can overcome that detail and really understand, there's opportunity because people are like, oh no, the sky's falling, and the sky's not falling anymore in Victoria, is it, Joe? You're seeing it's. I'm hearing there's a lot of competition coming in Victoria, Melbourne.
Yeah, it's annoying that there's so much competition, but that's a part of what happens when you buy. Like our property, we had to get window winders, so we had to get 15 window winders. Like there's little bits and pieces that you have to do. Oh, like one of the annoying things is there's old box heaters. You just have to remove that and fill it in. But because if it doesn't work and you get a tenant in and it doesn't work, you have to replace it and get a whole thing set up. So it is more annoying to be a landlord. But I guess the question is, do you want to buy somewhere like Perth that's grown 70% in the last 3 years, or do you want to buy somewhere in Victoria that has grown 2% in the last 3 years? What's more likely to grow another 70%? The one that's already grown 70% or the one that's grown 3%? I don't know.
yeah.
I don't
And
know.
I think
Which
also,
one?
particularly, if the cost of construction is more than what the property is selling for, it's only a matter of time before that property increases. The other thing is
Yeah.
like people, people are very particular in certain areas, but in every area, there's always going to be deals. There's always going to be divorce sales, deceased sales. There's going to be, people
Yeah.
under financial pressure to sell. So, I mean, one of our purchases we did was. I don't know why the agent told me, but they did. There was an 82-year-old owner. They had it listed for 880,000. I offered 578. They sat on it for a couple of months. Eventually, the agent came back to me and said, "Look, no one else put an offer in, and this elderly owner just wants to live out the best of their lives for the next few years," and they accepted it. So, don't be scared of putting in. They
Wow.
call it lowball offers. Lowball offers, and the agents by law, if you submit an offer, they have to present it. Don't if there's a price guide, don't be scared of putting an offer in that's 10 or 20% below that. So that's my thoughts, and you'd be shocked
Mm.
just if it's a quiet market or it's an area that hasn't got a lot of inquiries, well, the vendor might actually just accept that so-called lowball offer.
Yeah,
Mm.
you can either make money in a hotter market, but then you have to probably pay more, or you can make money in a cooler market where you can negotiate probably harder. So
Yeah.
equity but then you just have to accept that it might not grow. So your equity is kind of inbuilt in negotiating harder. So it's really vital you understand those markets. So
Yeah.
should we
And I
throw it
think
out first? Sorry, mate.
sorry, I was just going to say the other thing, it depends on people's goals because some people it's about capital growth and then
Yeah,
other people
yeah,
it's about yield. So the last purchase was it might not have the best capital growth, but it's got a super high yield, so it creates more passive income. So, a lot of
yeah.
people recommend that you buy originally for the capital growth to build your equity so you can buy more. But you might get to a point where you might go, actually, I might start buying higher yielding properties with little capital growth, but it's going to be able to fund my lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like that's the ultimate goal of all of this. And this is where I see people getting stuck when they just focus on cash flow up front. No, it needs to be 5, 6, 7% yield. well, then you're going to be sacrificing something, and that something is capital growth. And it's that next deposit. Like, it's only every time I speak to people that have 3 properties or 2 or 3 properties, it's like, I get it. I need the capital growth because that's what is allowing me to get number 3. The 100 grand from this one, or the 60 grand from that one is now allowing me to go for number 3. But if you ever just focused on cash flow for the first one, yes, you've got an extra $20 in your pocket a week, but it's not going to do anything for you for the next one. Let's jump to our sponsor and then jump through some of these questions that people have chucked in the comments.
Oh, Jeff, I wish there was 3 investing books that covered everything property.
Oh, Joe, there is. Steve has 3 books now.
That I do, guys. I've got 3 books now. You probably don't even have to follow this group anymore. Just kidding. You want to keep seeing and hearing from me, of course, so stay involved. But in all seriousness, if you want to get the full picture of investing, residential, commercial, and development, these 3 books have you covered for the fundamentals. For OzProp members, here's the best part. I'm giving these books to you for free. Just cover the postage and I'll send them right to your door. Go to policyproperty.com or click the link below and get your copies today. You can also get all my spreadsheets, checklists, and resources free on my website. Happy reading, gang.
There you go. He's there. So Joe, before we got to questions, I mean, depending on how you're, I mean, it's looks quite hot, and you've had a lot of sort of activity. But I had a few more questions. I just want to sort of wrap on understand the portfolio. So knowing what you know now, what would you kind of have done? What are some of the mistakes, and what would you have done differently, Sam?
Yeah, probably the first thing is something's better than nothing. Eventually, you know, obviously don't buy the absolute worst case, but I think don't aim for the dream place number 1. You know, like if you're eastern suburbs Sydney or beachfront, is it, you know, the best parts of Melbourne or whatever it may be, you don't need to buy, you don't need to live in the property. It can purely be an investment property. I still don't own my own house, you know, so people were like shocked. They're like, oh, well, where's your house? Like, I don't have a house. I still rent. When I go back to Australia, I rent, you know, and rent investor, and it's becoming more common. Probably just that, like we mentioned on before, this you know, paying for that advice from the start with lawyers, particularly the structure, the ownership. Do you buy in your own name? Do you buy in a trust or a company? I think I probably would have done that differently. And there's advantages, you know, obviously buying in your own name, there's a lot of advantages. You're not paying first, you know, stamp duty if you're a first time buyer and things like that. And so I think, I probably would have done that a bit more. I would have taken a bit more risk. There's probably areas that I thought, I'm not going to go in there because it's rough. Well, you know, a lot of these rough areas over 5 or 10 years become quite good. The other one is not discounting the areas that have had no growth. You know, like I regret not buying in Gold Coast. You know, I remember, you know, maybe only 6 or 7 years ago, apartments for 250,000. You know, and I just thought, man, it's just so good, but it's had no growth for 12 years, and you know, I would have probably taken a bit more risk and brought in markets that maybe it is not seen as so desirable or haven't had such a good track history.
Logan, for example, mate. Logan, you could have picked up a house that's now doubled and some.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway.
Yeah. There's such great points. The other point that I would just like to make on the professional side of things when it comes to trusts and structuring, just know everyone has a bias toward their profession regarding trusts and structuring. So you just have to look at it from the lens at which that professional has it. So for me, it's get the free advice first from your broker, and you then buyer's agent will give you some advice around that. But the broker cares about the structures because they want the best borrowing ability and serviceability to be able to get you into the next one, right? The accountant is looking at it from a trust perspective, from a tax perspective. Well, if you get a trust, you're not going to be able to minimize your tax. You're gonna not be able to get negative gearing benefits. And then the lawyer is looking at it from a protection standpoint of like, what happens if you get sued? So if you only look at one of those, and then the buyer's agent likes it because you can continue buying and going again. So kind of on the broker side of things. So just when you're having these conversations, try and it's hard to get everyone in the room at the same time, but bounce ideas off of everyone. Say, hey, I was chatting to my broker about trust, and he said that I need to get that from a borrowing capacity. What about from the accounting perspective? Oh, no, you're not going to get negative gearing. Cool. I've got two differing opinions on my head. Now I need to make the decision of, well, what should I do? And then go down the path that best fits you.
Great point, Joe.
That's a great tip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks,
so
Sam.
no, thanks. I think both of you. I mean, you've hammered home the point. So I want to know, how does it sort of feel, and logistically, the tax wise and all that is an absolute pain in the backside owning properties across Australia and New Zealand.
Point.
Yeah, there is. That's like, yet again, it's sort of, like Joe just mentioned, getting two different opinions. I've gone to accountants, and one's like, disclose that income to the Australian government, and vice versa. And the other one says, don't worry about it. So you ultimately need to get your own advice. And I'm a big fan of getting at least two opinions, and I do that with a lot of things. I even do it with a mortgage broker. I use two mortgage brokers. I don't tell them that I'm using each other, just to bounce off ideas off both of them. But like there is implications, especially if you're selling, whether you're classified as a tax resident in that country. So if you sell a property, and do you need to pay tax in both countries? And there's a lot of variables, like how many days you spend in that country. Have you got a permanent address? So there is ways to structure it so you don't have to pay high taxes, and that's where you do really need to seek your own advice.
Yeah, that's definitely
okay. So it's not as easy and straightforward with New Zealand from a tax perspective. You do have to be very careful on that. Yeah, well, like for example, if trust, like you don't write a trust owns, it's like, well, is that trust based, and how many days have you spent in the country? I think if you spend so many days in the country,
you're a citizen of the other country.
Yeah, so there's a lot to it, and it can be a bit of a grey area. From the advice I've got, it's not really enforced. The governments, they're not really hunting this. There's a lot of people that own properties in both countries, and they sell one and they never really get hit up. So it may be one of those things that you just, if you got conflicting information, you just provide the information that's asked and nothing more. But I think everyone's circumstances are different. So I can't really give a specific answer because there's so many variables.
No, I think you've given enough broad brush color and strokes. I wanted to ask, we've kind of answered this first one about while traveling. It kind of, it adds complexity. But are you tempted to sell up and chuck into ETF Dave Gow style? Like, has that ever crossed your mind, Sam?
Like just pay it all down, get your $3 million.
Yeah, I've thought about that, but I mean, the properties still keep increasing in the medium to long term. I mean, my motto is never sell unless there's a real good reason, because property always goes up long term. Even the most scummiest, shittiest of areas, eventually it goes up, and rents typically always go up. It's just a matter of time. So in terms of the management, I mean, that's a real common question I have. Like, people are like real skeptical of growing a larger portfolio because they're like, oh, all the property management. Well, from day one, I've always used property managers. I've done my research. I look up the company, how many staff they've got. I'm not going to use a company that's only got one staff, because if they're sick for 2 weeks, what's going to happen? So, I use bigger companies, your big main brand, Ray White's and LJ Hookers, for example. But the property managers, these guys pretty much do everything. I mean, they will probably once a year, they'll contact me saying, hey, we're doing a rent review. This is what we recommend it goes up to. Do you agree? And I say, yep. Or the stove's broken. Do you want us to get a quote to replace it or repair it? And I'll say, I'll still get a quote for both. But other than that, using property managers, it really takes up almost none of your time. And they're up to date with the legislation in terms of, how many inspections need doing per year for your insurance and different things like that. So I'd rather just outsource that, pay them their 6 or 7%, and not have to, have phone calls at 2 a.m. saying the plumbing's broken.
Yeah, exactly. And you're going to pay it anyway. Like, you're going, the plumbing's, well, hang on, send a plumber out. Well, you're going to send a plumber out anyway. So you just don't need to be the one dealing with it. Because there's no way that you can scale a massive portfolio with doing all the property management stuff, especially with the new legislations everywhere. It's crazy.
Yeah. I think property managers get a bad rap. Like, I think they do reasonably a pretty good job. They're like sort of like secondhand car dealers. They all think they're scammy. They're not actually scamming. They're just, most of them are on a salary. They've got no incentive to rip you off. I mean, there's so much legislation. They provide invoices showing the costs from the different suppliers. And I'd like to give approval for like things over $500. So, if there's something breaks and it's over $500, if it's not urgent, by law they have to do it straight away. But if it's not urgent, like the curtains are buggered or something, I'd still like to approve that, just because sometimes I'll say, actually, no, just keep it. I'm planning to do a renovation, so I don't want anything done. But for the most part, in regards to the question, it's never been an issue. It never takes up my time. There's no harm in managing it yourself. Some people like to be hands-on, but I really, to lose 7%. I mean, a lot of statistics show they actually get more in rent than what you do it yourself, because they have access to realestate.com and different portals that private landlords don't. So each their own. But if you want freedom to choose what you do with your day, then property managers help a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're the unsung hero of the property investing world of property managers. Like, they get paid the least amount of money and do some of the most amount of work. So that's a great question, right? You chat to a property manager or your conveyancer, like, what are some of the key points, like this question here? How do you choose your team?
Yeah, I go pretty tough on this. The most common one is people go, I'll be like, who's your mortgage broker? And they're like, oh, my friend recommended this person. And they're just like, that's it. That's enough, like, reference for them. For me, that's not enough. Like, I go on the website. I don't like small one-person companies. I like professional, larger companies. They've got all the different insurances if you need to sue them if they give you bad advice or muck something up. Google reviews. Have a look through the Google reviews, right? Like, I've seen property management companies where the reviews are just shocking, right? Like, tenants and landlords. And why would someone use them if they're just doing such a bad job? And then obviously just looking at the person, their experience, like, particularly if they've got experience as a property investor themselves, well, that gives me a lot more confidence. But I think just saying I was recommended by so and so, unless that person's like really done their research as well. But just because your brother who owns one property goes, oh, this bank's the best. I mean, I just don't see why you'd go directly to that bank. You'd best to use a broker that you've done research on and let them go approach the banks for you.
A question I love to ask people is, how have you kind of helped people similar to me get to where I want to go? Because if they can sort of articulate and have that process and plan in play, sure, they can be talking rubbish, but you can only pretend that for so long, because you're going to get found out really quickly if you don't actually know how to articulate and build that strategy for that person. Or if it's a property manager, a question I love to sort of understand is, well, how do you actually deal with challenges? Like, how do you communicate that thing? And it's just making them think about their process. Because if they can't articulate that on the spot, if they don't know it, if they're just kind of making it up, that kind of gives them a bit of a clue. It's like, okay, well, so when,
well, I think it's like, like watching podcasts like that you guys do and the information that you guys provide. You really got to do some work. You can be super lazy and use a buyer agent, but a lot of these buyer agents, they get paid $10,000 whether the property's good or not. So you got to be a little bit more skeptical. But I think you really got to do some research yourself. I remember learning to surf, because I spent a lot of time in Bondi Beach in Sydney, and for 2 years I just couldn't do anything. And eventually I went on YouTube and looked at a 10-minute video. And it's like, you place your feet here and you get up at this point in the wave. And if I just done that from the start, I would have learned within a month. I would have been standing up. And 2 years later, I still wasn't standing up. So I think, rather than just diving in the deep end, actually doing some research yourself and looking at other success stories. I've always been a fan of researching other successful investors and their strategies, and how they've done it. And quite a few of them are quite different. One might say do this and one might say do that, but you listen to both sides. Actually, you're going to make your own decision at the end of the day. And I think
what about like a surf instructor? Like, if you hired a surf instructor to help guide you through how to get on a surfboard, how to stand up, how to choose the best line of the wave, would that have been?
It would have been better, but it would have affected my serviceability, right? Because the banks would have seen I was paying $20 for some surf instructor.
Yeah, exactly.
But you are right. Right? Like, pay those professionals. Don't
really hard.
Spend money to make money. Yeah.
That's funny.
Are we playing a second ad, Joe, or are we not?
Oh, we got another ad to play. So sit with us.
Everywhere you look, someone else is making money in property except for you. Your mate, he just bought a house. It's already gone up $100,000. There's some bloke on Facebook. He's bragging about pulling in a 7% rental yield. Meanwhile, you're stuck scrolling real estate and domain, confused as hell and having no idea about where to start. Or maybe you're that mate that's got $100,000 in equity. You have a few properties under your belt, but you feel stuck. You're unsure about how to scale without over leveraging and not knowing what the next right move is. So why does it feel like everyone else has some kind of secret that you're missing out on? It's because they do. There's a reason some people keep stacking properties while others sit on the sidelines stacking excuses. There's a reason why some investors buy under market value while others pay too much. There's a reason why investors know the hot spots before there's any heat. And there's a reason that some people build $150,000 in passive income while others just spend years thinking about it. And it comes down to knowledge. And that's exactly why Jeff Miles and I, Joe Tucker, created the Level Up Property course to hand you the exact step-by-step process that we've used to buy over $100 million worth of property in today's market. We've built Australia's largest property investment community with over 80,000 members, and we help everyday investors secure hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity, all without wasting years of their life trying to figure it out the hard way. Making an uneducated decision on the biggest purchase in your life is just gambling with your future.
Stop it. Get some help.
And this isn't just another how to buy property course. Let's be clear though, this course isn't free. What? And neither should it be. This is our life's work. We've spent over 100 hours each on this course alone.
Oh, babe. Okay, video number 3. Number 4 with million does... Fuck. Done.
We've got decades of experience, millions of dollars in deals distilled into a repeatable process that you can take away for yourself. If you're looking for free advice, there's plenty of noise out there. You can go and find that if you'd like. But if you want real, actionable, step-by-step guided process that works in today's market, then this investment is going to change everything for you. By the time that you finish this course, you will have full confidence. You'll have every tool that you need to build an amazing portfolio if you act on it, right? Which is why we have mentoring built in. So we kick you up the butt to make sure that you're kicking your goals. So the real question is, how much longer are you going to watch everyone else making money in property before you jump in and start playing the property game properly? Because the sooner you start, the sooner you start winning.
We are back. Speaking of end goals, Sam, one of the questions I wanted to ask you, which Francis, and she loves an end goal as well. What is the end goal? What do you want to achieve with a property investing?
Yeah, look, I mean, I just love property. You know, I just love the whole process of it. It doesn't seem like a job, like me finding property or doing deals. It doesn't even seem like a job, you know. So, I'll just keep buying. And obviously, you know, I am pretty capitalistic. You know, like some people are like, oh, the more money I get doesn't affect me. I'm like, no, like I want the private jet and shit. You know, like I want, you know, I want the big mansion. So, you know, to get to that point, you know, I need to keep growing, and that's what I'll keep doing. And you know, financial freedom for me has always been the main goal. And, you know, I love travel. There's 195 countries in the world. I'm planning to do them all. There's about only 200 people in the world that have done that. So, you know, to keep funding that.
Only 200 people in the world.
Yeah, not a lot. It's bloody hard, Joe. It's bloody hard. I mean, you and I have both been to over 30, so we're going all right. But I haven't been to another country in, what, 5 years now, 6 years now. Don't travel these days.
Yeah, but 200, that's surely there's more people that want to do that.
Some countries, like North Korea, is just like near impossible to get into. Some countries like Sudan and Somalia.
Do you want to go to Syria? Do you want to go to you want to go to Yemen these days as well? I mean, I'd love to actually go to these places myself, but
the countries I'm likely to die in. Yeah, the countries I'm likely to die in, I'm leaving to the very end. Yeah.
Okay, so but that's one of the things that's conflicting, or well, not so much conflicting, is I want the private jet and the mansions and the crazy stuff, but you're also doing it right now. You're still traveling right now. Like you've kind of found a balance of both, being able to still focus on the capital growth and still have the cash flow enough to support it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think everyone's got different goals. You know, I've got friends that have, you know, got enough passive income from property, and they spend their time. They love surfing, or they love, you know, philanthropy stuff, which I'll get into eventually. You know, going to India and helping build schools. You know, to me that sounds really cool. Like I'd love to go to some of these countries and make a real impact. And you know, I I do cash, especially young children in really poor countries. I just cash out because $10 to them is like a week's wage, So I do a little bit of that now, but I'd love to do that more on a larger scale. But everyone's different because there's no right or wrong answer. Like a big mansion and a private jet, it's a little bit greedy, but that's just for myself. I still plan to do other things. But some of the happiest people I know are not living in big mansions. They, like I'm in Bali. Some of these locals here living in a little beach hut, and they spend their days fishing, and they might sell a couple of Coke cans, which funds their lifestyle. But everyone's got different goals, and it's just working out what yours is, I suppose.
100%. Yeah, I was talking to young Mike Mortlock on this yesterday. He recently cycled across Thailand, and he was raising funds for that. And he just said, like, these people, they have one little toy that they sort of have there, and poor Joe's coughing up a little bit, so I can talk a little bit more. But no, it's just crazy. Yeah, and I've been to some of the developing countries, and you just see the absolute glee on the face when just racing after the truck that you 2 trucks go by in the day.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask this question from Elijah, and I think you sort of answered it, but I'll ask anyway. How do you buy more properties if not working anymore? Tier 3 or money partners? Is it kind of cash and just trust?
Yeah.
Like, what do you?
Well, yeah. Look, as some people might know, once you start generating enough income from your properties, well, the banks consider that your income, like your salary almost, or whatever, right? So,
Yep.
obviously the first one, yeah, you need to work for someone or for yourself, but whatever. But once you get to enough and you got enough income coming in, then the banks use that rent or that surplus income as your purchasing power for more properties. I'm not against the idea of maybe doing 2 or 3 months work in Australia or New Zealand if I really have to. Typically, I believe most banks want 3 months sort of PAYE to consider that income. But I'm not. If there was a really good deal and I was going to really kill it, I would go back and do 3 months in a corporate job or any job for that matter. I've got friends moving from New Zealand to Australia, and they say, "What should I do?" I'm an accountant. I'm like, "Well, don't do that. Go do like cleaning, and you'll be on like $50 an hour."
Nice. Poor guy's losing the voice. I think we might have to 1 or 2 more questions if we can. But Joe, do you have any burning questions we need to ask Sam? Poor guy's losing his voice.
No, that's all right. That's all right. It's because I went on a boat party yesterday, and then I went to a nightclub at night, and the music's so loud you got to scream to talk to people. So it's not you.
I know, yeah, I know that all too well, and it's just the excitement. It gets to me as well. I'll go out one day, and next moment, anyway, not about me going out. I've just got to live really my glory days. Well, Joe, do you have any burning questions that we should ask? You want to ask Sam? I've got hundreds we could ask. But
I've got no burning ones. I mean, is there anything else we haven't covered off that you wanted to kind of chat to? Are there any other points that you think it will be valuable for people to take it? Because I think you've done something very, very courageous in not just settling for a normal life. Like don't take your 9 to 5. Don't go and buy this, buy a property, live your normal life. Like you've said, okay, great. I want to invest in property, but the reason I'm investing in property is so I can travel the world, and I want to be able to do that. And you've actually taken action on it. Like that's my key takeaway from this is like, what is that ultimate goal for you? Like it doesn't have to be a financial number, but it will get to a financial number. Whatever you want to do is time, and time is money, and you have to work out how can I buy back my time. But yeah, it's really inspirational. Anything?
Yeah, that's sort of my point of view. Like for me, like happiness is probably the most important thing. Obviously being a good person and everything, but happiness is just so important, and whatever it may be for you. And if you don't know what it is, maybe read a lot of psychology books. Try lots of hobbies, different jobs, whatever it may be. But I've always been a fan of like freedom of time, and I've researched it. There's a Harvard University an 80-year survey where they survey people every year for their whole life, and then when they're on their deathbed, they interview them, and what do you regret not doing, what you regret doing, and what would you have done differently. And it's quite weird. They all say they regret working too much, not spending time with family and friends, maybe looking after their health, and relationships typically they say is the most important thing. Friends and family. It is called me traveling. I do meet a lot of people, but a lot of them are only 2 or 3 days here and there. So so it's not for everyone. And just doing what you enjoy. And the reason I'm such a big fan of property is if you start, the sooner you start, the better. And it's only a matter of time. If you keep growing, it's only a matter of time before you get to a point where you do have freedom to do whatever you want to do. But yeah, taking action, like your guys' course, I know people that have done your course. I personally haven't done it, but I know people that have, and they said the amount of value they've got out of that is just insane. So, the resources are there. It's just like people just need to actually just take action.
Nice, man. That's
Yeah.
very kind.
Yeah.
I was going to say it is the 5 Regrets of Dying. Bonnie Ware is the Aussie sort of palliative care nurse. I haven't. It's on my list, but that's a really good one. And she pretty much paralleled those 5 things you mentioned. It's like I spent too much time working. I didn't spend enough time with family. I didn't take chances. Like I didn't actually go and explore the world like you're doing now. So you're kind of doing the reverse. You are you're not going to have those regrets hopefully in your deathbed because you'll have done all this stuff. So good. In your 30s, you're younger than Joe. Sorry, no, you're not younger than Joe. Joe's a bit younger than you, mate. But, yeah.
He looks like Botox. Botox, or how do you do that? What do you?
No, I want to say, team.
I just strap it back.
Team, if you've gotten, look, we're getting more Spotify reviews. So this guy's living and traveling 20 to 30 countries a year. So if you want to become more like Sam and live that sort of life, whichever you want to do, drop us a 5-star on Spotify. We'll keep getting guests because you are persistent. I admire you actually reaching out to us. So if you've gotten value from the session, drop us a 5-star. We'd love that. But Joe, take us home, mate. Take us home. I don't know.
Well, is there anything? Yeah, Sam, is there anything you wanted to kind of put to the audience, or like if people can check you out or get in touch or follow your journey? Or I mean, you've just reached out as an investor story, but I don't know if you've got a little side hustle you want to pump or
No. Well, from a young age, I've always admired people that have shared knowledge, especially books. Like biographies are my favorite, successful people in sports or business or whatever it may be. So yeah, I mean, I don't sell any services or anything. I'm just wanting to share information and hopefully it helps people. I mean, if you're interested in traveling, you can search my name up on Instagram. If you want to see, occasionally I do the odd video about property, but it's not, it's just, a deal I've done or something. But
are you on YouTube?
I'm just providing some information for free just because I want to share the knowledge and I'm just so passionate about it.
Yeah, so good.
I'm just
so
trying
good.
to see where people can follow you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, global. You're in 84 countries, mate. Well done. But anyway, go on.
Thank you.
Go and check out his journey.
Let's go buy a property, guys. Catch you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great one.
See you next week.
Have a great evening. Thank you. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.